CEO follows an employee working double shifts who asked for food to her home. What he saw. Lucas stood frozen, the cold night air biting at his skin, but he barely felt it. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Eva Mitchell, one of his most reliable employees, was living in conditions he couldn't have imagined. The image of her splitting that takeout container between two small children replayed in his mind. She wasn't just working hard, she was fighting to keep her family afloat. And here he was, standing in the shadows, feeling like an intruder in her life. He took a step back, his polished shoes crunching lightly against the cracked sidewalk. This wasn't his place. He shouldn't have followed her. But as he turned to leave, something stopped him. The weight of what he had seen pressed down on him, heavier than any business decision he'd ever made. Lucas had always prided himself on being a self-made man, someone who understood the value of hard work. But now, he wondered if he truly understood what hard work looked like for people like Eva. The next morning, Lucas arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. He sat at his desk staring at the reports in front of him, but his mind kept drifting back to Eva and those two kids. He couldn't shake the image of her kneeling on that bare floor, handing over the food she'd asked for. She hadn't taken a single bite for herself. By the time the rest of the staff began trickling in, Lucas had made up his mind. He called his assistant, Sarah, into his office. "I need you to pull Eva Mitchell's file," he said, his tone firm but calm. Sarah nodded, sensing the gravity in his voice, and left to retrieve the information. When she returned, Lucas flipped through the file. Eva had been with the company for 5 years. Her performance reviews were impeccable, always punctual, always reliable, never a complaint. But her salary was barely above minimum wage. Lucas frowned. How had he never noticed this before? How had he never questioned why someone so dedicated was earning so little? He leaned back in his chair, staring out the glass wall of his office. The cafeteria was visible from here, and he could see the kitchen staff preparing for the day. Last night's scene replayed in his mind, Eva hesitating, the cook's furrowed brow, the takeout container being handed over. It wasn't just about the food, it was about dignity. Eva had been forced to ask for help, something she clearly wasn't comfortable doing. And Lucas had built a company where that was even necessary. He stood abruptly, grabbing his suit jacket. "Cancel my meetings for the morning," he told Sarah as he walked out. "I'll be back in a couple of hours." Lucas drove to the part of town he'd seen last night. The streets were narrower here, the buildings older. He found the apartment complex easily, its rusted railings and flickering porch lights unmistakable. He parked his car and sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. What was he even doing here? This wasn't his world. But then he thought of Eva's face, the quiet determination in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't just walk away. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. When he reached her door, he hesitated. What would he even say? Before he could knock, the door opened, and Eva stood there, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Carter?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she held herself with the same quiet strength he'd always admired. "Eva," Lucas began, his voice softer than he intended. I need to talk to you." She glanced over her shoulder into the apartment, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone cautious. Lucas took a deep breath. "I saw you last night," he admitted. "I followed you. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw." Eva's face flushed, and she looked down at her feet. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I needed to make sure they had something to eat." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. "Eva, you don't have to apologize. I'm the one who should be sorry. I had no idea you were struggling like this," You've been with the company for years, and I never took the time to see what was really going on." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's not your job to worry about me, Mr. Carter. I'm just an employee." "No," Lucas said firmly. "You're not just an employee. You're part of this company, and you've given more to it than anyone else. You shouldn't have to live like this." Eva shook her head. "I'm doing the best I can. It's not much, but it's enough for now." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He scribbled something on the back and handed it to her. "This is the number for our HR department. Call them today. Tell them I sent you. We're going to get you the support you need. Better pay, benefits, whatever it takes. And if there's anything else, anything at all, you let me know." Eva stared at the card, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Lucas replied. "Just know that you're not alone in this. You've been carrying this weight by yourself for too long. Let us help you." For the first time, Eva's composure cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. He had a lot to make up for, not just with Eva, but with all his employees. As he walked back to his car, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do better. He would build a company where no one had to choose between feeding their family and keeping their dignity. Because success wasn't just about profits and growth, it was about the people who made it all possible. Lucas leaned back in his chair after Eva left, his mind still racing. The envelope he had given her contained not just a financial lifeline, but a detailed plan for restructuring the company's policies. It was a start, but he knew it wasn't enough. He needed to do more. Not just for Eva, but for every employee who had ever felt invisible, overlooked, or left behind. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but for the first time in years it felt like a purpose rather than a burden. Over the next few days, Lucas threw himself into the project. He called meetings with department heads, HR, and even the board of directors. At first, the resistance was palpable. "This will cut into profits," one board member argued. "We can't afford to be a charity," another scoffed. But Lucas stood firm. "This isn't charity," he repeated, his voice steady but fierce. "This is an investment in the people who make this company what it is. If we don't take care of them, we're not just failing them, we're failing ourselves." Meanwhile, Eva returned to her apartment that first night with the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Her daughter Lily was already asleep, curled up on the worn couch with a blanket that was too small for her. Eva's son, Max, sat at the small kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom? What's that?" he asked, pointing to the envelope. Eva hesitated, then sat down beside him. "It's a chance," she said softly, her voice trembling. "A chance for things to get better." She opened the envelope and pulled out the contents. A letter from Lucas outlining the immediate financial assistance, along with a proposal for long-term changes. Max's eyes widened as he scanned the words. "Does this mean we won't have to worry about food anymore?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Eva's throat tightened. "It means we're going to be okay," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. The next morning, Eva returned to work, her steps a little lighter. She wasn't sure what to expect, but when she walked into the break room, she found a small group of coworkers huddled together, whispering. They fell silent when they saw her, and one of them, a woman named Maria, stepped forward. "Eva," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Did you hear about the meeting?" Eva frowned. "What meeting?" Maria glanced around, then leaned in closer. "Lucas called a company-wide meeting for this afternoon. Rumor is it's about wages and benefits. People are saying, well, they're saying you had something to do with it." Eva's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected Lucas to move so quickly, and she certainly hadn't expected to be the center of attention. I don't know, she stammered. I just talked to him, that's all. Maria studied her for a moment, then nodded. Whatever you did, thank you. We've all been struggling, but no one's had the guts to say anything. If this is real, it could change everything. The meeting that afternoon was unlike anything the company had ever seen. Lucas stood at the front of the room, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something more raw, more human. He didn't mince words. I've spent years building this company, he began, his voice carrying through the silent room. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters. I let people fall through the cracks, and for that, I'm sorry. He went on to outline the changes he wanted to make: raising wages, offering childcare support, providing emergency assistance for employees in crisis. The room erupted in murmurs, some of disbelief, others of cautious hope. Lucas held up a hand, silencing the crowd. I know this won't be easy, he said. It's going to take time, and it's going to take all of us working together, but I believe we can do it. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the only way we can truly succeed. As the meeting ended, Eva found herself surrounded by coworkers, their faces a mix of gratitude and disbelief. You did this, Maria said, squeezing her arm. You gave us a voice. Eva shook her head. No, she said softly. Lucas did this. I just showed him what was already there. In the weeks that followed, the changes began to take shape. Wages were raised, and new programs were rolled out to support employees. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges and setbacks, but for the first time, people felt seen. Eva found herself stepping into a new role, working closely with Lucas to ensure the changes were implemented fairly and effectively. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. For the first time in years, she felt like she was making a difference. One evening, as she was leaving the office, Lucas stopped her in the hallway. Eva, he said, his voice quiet but sincere, I just wanted to say thank you. None of this would have happened without you. Eva shook her head. You didn't have to do this, she said. But I'm glad you did. Lucas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. So am I, he said. This is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, but I think we're on the right track. As Eva walked out into the cool evening air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone, and that made all the difference.